One of the frustrating things about management I've found over a 40-year career, or whatever it was, is that I can't, as a senior, qualified, extremely important person, I can't remember anybody's phone number. And for 40 years, I've always had this crutch called as an assistant or a secretary or somebody who kept the Rolodex up to date. Well, there's not a person over here now. And my Rolodex now is simply a group in Word, in a Microsoft group file, whatever it's called. And I don't keep it up to date. So, it's a long way of saying, many of you who've been on the list once have been kicked off. You were put on the list incorrectly, or you were never put on the list. And when I reach over here to say to my assistant, for God's sakes, keep it up, get this organized, there's nobody here.
Where's Sally Ann?
She's on this side. She's made it very clear for 40 years of marriage that she's not going to keep it up. Well, that's why we've started this, because Forrest is more organized. Anyway, I may not have your correct email. That's the point of this dither. Please, if you're not receiving an invitation to come to a meeting or documents about a meeting sometime before the particular Friday, just send me an email. And if you send it to me, then I will presumably have your correct email. I think we have a couple of visitors here. I'll start by asking Ben, what's your last name again? Campen. That's an easier last name than mine. Ben Campen, who's here considering the possibility of move to Vickers Oakbridge. You can stand if you want, Ben, or just sit. It's all right. That's Ben. We have at least one son. We have two sons. But I think I'm going to start with the Harvard son first because it's really important. Harvard 81, Sandra and Phil Berneman's son.
Buck Berneman, and don't hold the Harvard against me.
Welcome, Buck. And another son over here.
Hi, Charles Basil.
Charles, welcome.
Thank you.
Anybody else who's either new to the group, new to Vickers, or lost? The plan today is to cover not a lot of issues, but start with a couple and we'll see where we go. The idea is for Forrest and I to kind of each share a position to the right or to the left and talk about that. If in fact the issue has a clear left and right side. I think today a lot of issues do not have such clear divisions, but we make them up. Just because, well, I'm on one side of the aisle and you're on the other side, so we can't possibly agree. When in fact we clearly agree, because it's obvious. Yeah. Agreed. So before we begin on issues, let me thank Forrest, who is not the brightest conservative I've ever met, but clearly the loudest. Okay, the first issue on our list, and ask questions, make comments, whatever it is. I'm trying to not. Could we get Jack and Kirk? Could you slide in a little bit to the right, since I feel like you're. Well, most importantly, your head is blocking the camera, which is aimed at my head. God can't do that.
He wants to be sure they get a good shot.
Exactly. The first issue is Ukraine. I don't know whether do you want to set up kind of what the problem is and what the stakes are, because I think you really do understand them very well.
I don't know that I understand it any better than anybody else, but I have a lot of thoughts about it. I think you have to start off with the fact that the Ukraine basically was the breadbasket of all this former Soviet Union. And that, regardless of what else is at play there, I think that's a big issue. Because Russia has trouble growing in the tundra, and Ukraine has a lot of fertile ground.
Can everybody hear?
No.
turn it well into your mouth like this. I think it's, is it on?
This thing?
She's gonna turn it on, but it's just on during your. It's gonna be turned up back here.
Oh, can you turn it up?
Yep.
Megan can?
Yes, she's doing that now. It sounds like Bob.
1, 2, 3. Anybody hear that?
No.
No.
Is mine louder?
Yes, is his little button on?
Yep.
Yeah, his little button's on.
It's on.
But I asked him earlier to make the conservative one weaker and a little bit befuddled.
Bob, you should have had on a blue sweater.
That's true.
Yeah, he doesn't see.
I'm green for
He doesn't
gold.
see well.
Okay, no ad comment. Okay.
Just leave it right there.
Now try speak.
1, 2, 3.
Can you bend it a little like this? No.
We got a thick head.
Is that better?
Okay, just leave it there.
All of you know Megan?
Yes, I made it.
Megan has joined the administrative staff for activities. She is Josh's successor. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you.
Okay, start with Ukraine was the bread basket.
Right. Well, I mean, everybody likes to eat, and they got a lot of food from the Ukraine, so I think that's at least one element. I don't think it's the biggest element. I think the biggest element is the fact that Putin would really like to go out with a former Soviet Union put back together, and I think he's intent on it and trying his best to do that. I thought when he went into Kazakhstan recently, I felt like that what he was really doing is distracting us from Ukraine. And I really thought he was going to go into Ukraine when he was in Kazakhstan also. But I guess they pulled out of there, at least temporarily. But I think he really is going to go into Ukraine. And I think Biden has given him a lot of ammunition to come on. I mean, in one situation, he said to him, that people were questioning him about it. He said, I expect him to come into Ukraine. I don't think I'd tell somebody I wanted to stay out that I expected him to come in. And then he said later that if it was a minor intrusion into Ukraine, there would probably be no reaction from the U.S. And then he said, if you come in, we're going to do all sorts of things. I think some things are actually happening, one of which is 8,500 troops going into the area around Ukraine and that are NATO countries. But I see that the issue there is that we're not really bringing the force we could. And I heard somebody else said that 100,000 troops versus 8,500 is not that much of a match. But I'm telling you, there's some guys in Tampa, Big Deal Air Force Base, that can rain hell all over that area if we want to, without any more than 8,500 people. So I think we've got a lot of things that play in our favor there. I don't think anybody wants to see any American die on foreign soil, but they have had, historically, they've paid a high price for that, doing it, but it's been very beneficial to the world.
I have a couple of questions about it. First of all, the idea that they're the breadbasket of a former Soviet republic, or let's say of Russia, of Eastern Europe. The Belarusians might have something to say about that. And if you go east from Belarus into former Russia, you're still in an area that produces a lot of grains.
As does the Russia that are joining Belarus.
Exactly. So do they need the grain production capability of Ukraine enough, the Russians, to go to war for grain or for food?
No, I said that was a secondary consideration.
And the primary one is oil, access to the sea,
It's an ego.
or just nothing but ego?
I really think he is absolutely paranoid. He's got a country that's 11 time zones wide now, and he wants some more.
And it's important, I think, to try to set up the situation. Why would Russia want to annex all or more of Ukraine and be willing to risk, at minimum, a significant interruption in gas supplies. And we're talking about they're doing this in the heart of winter. Why would they risk a gas supply reduction, which it may be vitally important to the Germans? I'm telling you, it's vitally important to Russia.
It's critically important to Germany.
And to Russia.
I believe,
Cut off that spigot of cash going
personally,
east.
I believe that he acted slowly over time. I think he could go all the way to Paris without a fire being shot at, a shot being fired.
Okay, so
But
let's
Germany's totally compromised at this point.
Phoebe,
Putin is now being crimped up.
turn it up. So,
Putin is now being crimped a bit now because it's been cut off financially, the banks and the whole system of banking in the EU and the United States is part of it.
and that has influenced his position in Ukraine. How?
Well, he can't get money.
But if in fact all of the sanctions put in place, there would be a significant financial pain in Russia.
Already paying.
Is it being felt already?
Yeah,
Is that your understanding too, Forrest? Or
well,
is-
that's what I've heard and read.
I read that that's an option we have, but I did not know it was in place. I
Yeah.
believe China will step up to help them no matter what.
No, I think the
Their own money is now becoming worthless.
Well, but as Forrest points out, if in fact they're fed from the east, if China decides, as I'm certain they will at this stage, they're united with Russia against a common enemy, they decide to back up the currency. I think Russia can stay alive with the current level of sanctions for a long time. But I think the risk to them is they take an action that precipitates the West taking a deeper, much deeper action financially. And what that really means, and that's the big issue, it seems to me, is wintertime in Germany. Is the West ready to make the Germans very cold this winter by cutting off their gas supply? And will the Germans allow us to do it?
Well, we would supply them.
We don't have the liquefied natural gas capability today, or the export capability today, nor do they have the import capability today. Yes.
You know more about that than I do.
Yeah, but, and that used to be, and I think some other energy people here feel free to step in. But eventually, the price of all the hydrocarbons varies so much it drives you crazy. But try putting together a deal to build an export terminal, and this kind of thing becomes very real. You're trying to raise money from all the usual suspects, and you're saying, I'll pay you back with all the liquefied natural gas. I'm going to liquefy to ship across the water, then regasify and then sell to replace that Russian gas. It only costs you twice as much, but it's our gas you're buying. That makes a convincing argument maybe to my bankers. I never worked, because they'd also say, oh, I don't care about the existence of the LPG. If you're talking about being twice as expensive as pipeline gas in Russia, I'm not backing your deal. And that's always been the case. LNG delivered across the water and regassed cannot compete with pipe gas. And the pipe gas is now like 70% of Germany's energy. So again, I say, well, and for Russia, it's an enormous share of their income, cash income.
Absolutely.
Are the Germans going to be on our side when we make them very cold next month?
No.
I don't think so either.
We've had other periods where the Germans were not on our side.
When that was during, I'm sorry.
I said there have been other periods
Oh,
where
that.
they haven't been on our side.
I'm not as old as you. But I think it's as we think about this today, these are the questions to ask. The idea behind this group getting together is to get smarter about current events. We are talking today, two nation states, big ones, talking today about the potential of war. classical, old-fashioned war with troops on the ground and tanks coming across borders. I mean, to me, it's just this anachronism, but it's as likely, I think, as the alternative, which is that we figure out how to solve this problem in the next 3 weeks.
Both sides are afraid to play with their big toys.
And that's the problem, both sides. And I think part of the problem is there's a machismo at work here. Some people are saying, do you have the chutzpah, gonads, there are several ways to say this, to really shoot? Charlie?
Congratulations on your chutzpah. Very well done. I kind of, by the way, I'm back here because I have to leave early.
We wondered.
It seems to me that this may be another way to test Biden, to see what they can get away with. And I think a number of things that have happened in the last year have been similar type things, whether it's the border or some other incursions. So I think there's an ego thing here, and there's a, let's see what I can get away with.
Forrest, you want to respond to that?
Charlie, you and I are completely agreement that it's an ego thing. I think he's got an ego bigger than his body. But probably some of them feel the same way I do. We see too much of his body occasionally. But I think ego really drives him to put the former Soviet Union back together.
Clearly, his wish is that it had never come apart, and can we put it back together?
Right.
And the fact that Belarus is governed by somebody as close as they are to the Kremlin, that Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, all of the countries around there, while no longer in the former Soviet Union, are certainly bound to Russia through treaties and alliances. The outlier is Ukraine.
You've had papers you didn't like, but you got to deal with them anyway.
Yeah. But my only view, again, this is not saying that there won't be some action in the next 30 to 60 days, because I think that I think we're just stupid enough that we might do that. And the we there includes principally, I think, Russians, but to a lesser extent, the West. And what concerns me is somebody's going to say it's better to show them that we're real by saying, don't come in and we'll shoot you. We'll shoot first at a small level or something. Or something saying anything can trigger a war when you've got two armies facing each other.
Well, Biden's got an ego too.
That's what I'm saying.
And he also has falling in the polls, looking dead in the face with the 22 elections. It'll hurt his party big time.
The interesting thing about that, to me, is I'm a German Hausfrau, where I'm married to one. We've got a couple of kids. All we want is to get through this winter warm. And Biden's never been to my town here in Germany.
Russians like cold.
And those Russians who like cold have never been to my town in Germany. And you jerks are saying your egos are driving you to risk war, turning off my heat.
They're not their bodies. Governments go to war, people don't.
Well, and how many of you are familiar with the term the long peace?
I've heard it.
The long peace is the period we're in now, which Forrest and other conservatives are willing to end. But let me just finish it. The long peace began at the end of World War II. And the period of time since World War II until today is the longest in history that nation states haven't been at war. And that long peace is credited with, I think correctly so, an enormous part of our standard of living globally. The fact that we're moving so many people out of poverty is that we haven't been stupid enough to spend, we've been stupid enough to spend a lot on wars, but not the whole thing. Carolee?
How do you explain that the president of Ukraine keeps saying he's perfectly content and not worried? Do you think this is a media blitz, that we're all concerned and they're not concerned in the middle of the country? Or is he just being facetious?
Forrest, you want to start?
I know what I think. they've had a democracy there for 30 years. And the young people who are the fighting age want to fight about democracy. And it gives him confidence that he's less vulnerable than if it's the other way around.
And, you know, interesting, to me, the problem is that the pissing match between egos is not happening in Ukraine. It's not happening in Germany where the gas is going to be taken off. It's happening between Putin and Biden. And a part of me wants to say, come on, we really don't have a dog in that fight, nor do we want one. And therefore, my advice, and nobody's asked for it, would be to tell the whole Biden apparatus organized to make war in the event that we can't force war, force peace, back up, stand down. And what you're risking, and here's the problem with what I'm about to say, and therefore I don't think I'll say it. What you're risking is, I don't really believe in NATO. As soon as we say we won't come to defense of X, the accusation is going to be, then you don't really believe them. You wouldn't come to defense for us either, would you? To which I would say, no, dummy. We're not going to go to war over Lithuania. I hope there are no Lithuanians here. The concept of the United States going to all-out war to defend the borders of a little country in the Baltic Sea.
It's not a matter of going to war, it's being prepared for war. The easiest way to stay out of war is prepare for war.
But if I communicate that I'm too intelligent to use these war preparations to the potential foe, is mankind so organized for war that we're destined to always do that?
It works pretty well when you got big toys.
So, and part of it, if we're going to live in a world that is prepared to go to war, we better have big toys.
You're darn right.
And more of them than the other guy. And my whole body says,
It's an insurance policy.
is there no way, as a global society, we can grow further than that?
There's some big egos that go with those big toys.
Oh, and those big egos are backed up, by the way, by big stockholders and big arms producing companies that are spread out throughout every state. There's some munitions or, but smart on the part of the Pentagon. That's how come we can get that's how we get an $850 billion defense budget and are screaming about $30 and $40 billion going to various forms of aid through Build Back Better. I know we can talk about that in a separate topic.
You want to talk about that in the Biden failures?
The Biden phase versus the Build Back Better Biden buy.
If that's Build Back Better, I hate to see something less than that.
Any more comments on Ukraine before we leave that topic? Joan, is this?
The NRA must be thrilled.
The NRA, they're probably saying, we whet your appetite, but the big guns, those that cost gajillions of dollars. I wish there were a better way. I don't know if there is. My party thing on Ukraine is to I think Biden's comment, the minor incursion comment, that we all, I think, appropriately say shouldn't have made, which he hadn't. But it's just simple fact. It's just simple fact. If somebody runs over a small town, I'm just making this up, on the eastern side of Ukraine, we're not going to come in and go whole hog on the whole thing. We're going to say, get out of that town. Just call that town Crimea. Get out of that town.
If Obama had said a little more, he probably wouldn't have gone in.
Say that again.
It's important.
I said, if Obama had been a little more forceful, that Putin would probably not have be in Crimea, he probably wouldn't be in eastern Ukraine right now.
That's an interesting question.
That's not a question, that's a fact.
That's an interesting assertion of fact, which rests on thin ice.
It's an opinion.
It's an opinion.
I got a lot of opinions. He asked me to be up here.
Joan, we need a mic here. Joan, go on the first row.
I think I think the Ukraine is a ploy for something else. I think that Putin wants something, and it doesn't need to be the Ukraine, it's a ploy to get something else. That's my feeling.
But what could that be, John? I think it's an interesting concept. What might he want enough to risk?
That's what I've been thinking about. I don't know what he wants. I don't think any of us really know what he really wants. He's a very smart guy with a big ego. But what he wants, I think Ukraine is a ploy to get something else. I don't know whether it's from the U. I don't know what it is, but I don't think that the Ukraine really is his issue. I think it's a ploy to get something else. I don't know whether it has to do with NATO or getting something from the United States or whatever. I don't know.
Do you want to start?
I have an opinion, Joan, and that's all it is. I think he does have desires for other things, but one of the thing about Putin is interesting to me. He's in trouble at home, and a lot of people create things outside of the home when they're in trouble at home. And I think it's happening in this country. It will happen over and over again throughout the world.
Yeah, some of that may be true, but I go back to Forrest's original statement, with which I completely agree. Putin does not like the current map of the former Soviet Union. And until he can put those pieces of that puzzle back together the way they were, he's not going to be happy.
I don't think he's going to be happy.
If that's Putin calling, take it. But no, that's really, you're saying that the idea of looking back on the history of the Soviet Union and Russia in the last 30 years is not something that'll make a person like Putin happy. And what he'd like to do is put it back together. And I don't think his attitude will change much until it's almost fully back together.
I don't think he will come.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
I just have a quick comment, which is, I think it's very interesting what happens in the Ukraine, what that means for Taiwan and China, because the Chinese are watching this very closely.
Very interesting perception. I couldn't agree more. And I'm not capable of multitasking mentally to say, no, don't bother me with Taiwan. I'm focused on Ukraine. Or don't bother me with the Uyghurs. You know, if they don't live in I don't know how the leaders do it, because that's really important.
Well, I think the thing that's a part of that Taiwan issue is Taiwan Semiconductor is the biggest semiconductor manufacturer in the world.
Yeah.
And they're building plants here to try to relieve some of that issue. But I think if Putin moves, Xi will move right after him. Maybe the same.
But certainly the constraint of a threat, if it's not fulfilled, ceases to be a constraint at all. Don?
Just a quick wild idea. Why don't we, the United States, or NATO, offer Russia the opportunity to join NATO?
I have a thought. I think that we've talked about it with them before, and a lot of people in NATO don't support that.
And Russia would have to do all sorts of crazy things. It's changed their whole structure in many, many ways. But I just wonder how that might change the atmosphere somewhat. Maybe just a little bit, maybe nothing at all. Maybe it's just throwing up a screen. But it's just a thought.
I would have a little humor I could add. Probably most of the things I say are. I feel like we could tell them that time zones just got narrower, and you give them a couple more time zones and maybe be happy.
You know, the idea of saying we can't get along, let's expand the size of our playground and all play with the same toys. In a sense, that's what we did after World War II. We said to the defeated parties, Japan and Germany, and to a lesser extent Italy, we're taking away your toys, and you're going to agree never to build toys like these again. Of course, look at what we've now said to both sides. We're going to defend yourselves. We shouldn't be doing it. That used to be a punishment. But I just think the idea of coming together after a war makes all the sense in the world. Are we ready yet to do that with the Soviets? I think they would say, as the Vietnamese, the people in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, there's ample evidence that the U.S. is smart enough not to be at war forever. And that reduces the threat of war.
We have become, this is World War II, the big boy in the block. And the big boy in the block is always looked to help everybody else. And we're getting tired of that. We, in the United States, this is becoming too much for us, both economically and psychologically. And how you ease out of that, and if you do that, who's going to take over? Because somebody always takes over.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
That's why we need to stay up there.
But the interesting thing about that, you've got two arguments frequently made by conservatives. We need to stay there as the global policing. And why should we pay to pay for their needs for policing?
Well, Trump got some of the NATO countries to pay up.
But what that means, if you stop and think, we're not asking them to pay money into NATO. We're asking them to build up a stronger military presence in their countries.
Exactly.
And when we say we threaten to pull out of our role as global peacekeeper, we're saying we've given you enough military permission that you can step into our role. Are we prepared to do that? Maybe we are.
I think we'd stay in a supporting role.
You think we should stay the biggest kid on the block, and our threat has to be enforceable, which means we have to use it, right?
You don't have to use it. You just have to have it. Just like if you got a mad dog in your yard and a couple of shotguns, and you post something that said, owner is armed and ready. Not many people come to that.
All of which has to go back to the deterrent effect of military force. It only deters if they believe the threat, which means we have to use it at some point.
You don't have to.
Well, we're going to find out soon. If the Russians move into Ukraine, they're saying, in effect, we don't believe you'll use it. Don?
One other thought. Somewhere along the line, it seems to me, and maybe years ahead, we've got to come up with some form of global governance. It's got to happen, because the globe keeps getting smaller and smaller, and how that is accomplished, I don't know. The United Nations, as it currently exists, is not there. But you have to be able to, if somebody gets out of hand in the neighborhood, you send the global group, the army or whatever, to police it, and not the United States or local, which is a long way down the pipe, but it's got to happen sooner or later.
I don't believe it'll ever happen in anybody's lifetime, born or unborn.
It's got to happen sooner or later. 3 or 4 generations from now, I don't know. But sooner or later, you cannot get away from this people, individual countries trying to do their thing, and others against it, and we got to have some sort of global governance, is the term I use.
I think it's an interesting, thoughtful thought, and all of us, it sounds appealing, but I think you'd have to rewire each one of us before birth for that to happen.
And take away a little testosterone. I said, may have to take away a little testosterone.
You know,
Women ran the deal, we wouldn't be at war.
I'm not sure about that. You ever heard of Margaret Thatcher?
True.
Get the occasional one.
but she'll not be regarded as a global peacekeeper or peacemaker. You know, heart and soul agrees completely with Don on my part. We ought to have effective global governance. We ought to spend enormously less, whatever size enormously less is, 90% less, globally on defense than we now spend. What a stupid way to use our great global intelligence and wealth, but to build, as we talked earlier about, more effective ways of organized killing. So all of me says, this is so insane, we've got to stop it. But I guarantee you, people said that at the end of World War I. And Woodrow Wilson said with League of Nations, we've got to stop it. Look at those freaking trenches. And just ask yourselves, is this really how humankind has to exist? And then we said it again in World War II and came up with the United Nations. And here we are, most people, well, I think probably it is most. Certainly many people say that's a worthless organization. Is it a majority yet? I don't know. But having worked with some of the tributaries of the big United Nations River, gosh, it's nice to see multiple countries, people from multiple different countries working on a common problem, whether that's some energy issues that we've cooperated on, or environmental issues.
How about the UN putting Libya when Gaddafi was still alive?
Oh, see, no, I'm not disagreeing with you. I think that the mistakes made by, we're all still frail humans, whether it be Libya or any one of a host of things, recognizing 100 new countries because they don't want to send, because those countries want to send somebody to New York. It's crazy.
Right.
Having said that, I prefer the effort of global governments to war.
I don't think there's anything wrong with trying. I just wouldn't count on it.
And that's probably wise counsel. Have we beat the Ukraine thing to death? Let me tell you something. I think we might have, but we're going to come back and talk about it again. It's not going to go away, particularly if some American boys and girls are shot.
Got a question?
We got first over here. I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
I would like to step back again, as I've asked previous weeks. We don't seem to recognize that the world economy is so different than it was after World War I, World War II, 3 years ago, no matter. And if you look at the Trump administration, he said Russia can do no wrong. We do virtually no real trade with Russia. We could lose Russia as a customer. Okay. So who do we do trade with? Europe, NATO. That's a huge part. So far as strategy goes, the NATO countries and Biden support resuming nuclear talks with Iran. That is a huge strategic play. For several reasons. One, Iran is a large, well-educated group of people. But more than that, they bring competition, actually, to the price of fuel. With their large position in the Arabian Gulf, Saudi Arabia and other countries cannot just decide to raise the price, because Iran is a significant contributor. And if they want to reach a nuclear deal, which I think the general population does, there's the military bloc within Iran, which obviously doesn't. But I think we need to recognize that all this strategy is kind of dwarfed by the world economy. And I think as far as Putin goes, yes, it seems like, and we don't know why, has a great ego. He's sad to see all his properties, as he would call them, gone. But the idea that his military is strong enough to go to Paris, that isn't in the cards. The Russian military, other than some obviously nuclear balance and perhaps their new rockets,
hypersonic,
are significant, and cyber warfare, which is, let's say, equal to ours. So it's like nuclear. It's kind of you don't want to use it because it's going to be used against you. But anyway, I just think changes in our world?
Forrest, you want to start with a comment? Well, first of all, I'm going to say thank you very much, because I think that's an extremely valid point. Before the EU was formed in its current form, I was working with some companies in the United Kingdom and on the continent of France. And we were trying to do deals, large energy deals that required inputs from as many people as we can get involved to make them happen. And the words that our council used, that the lawyers were all talking about, is we were going to be the coming together of the European Union was going to be transaction-led. In other words, whether they agree to form a union or not, we're going to have enough people in contact with each other across country lines that we're going to have effective global governance, because our contracts will provide the blueprint for that governance. What I'm really saying is the economic interaction will dominate. Apple could not be Apple without the supply chain in China. They just couldn't make the equipment that they make, and that's true of so many things. Are we really going to stop the global economy over Taiwan? I personally, I wouldn't want to move to Taiwan to test it.
You might pay a little more for chips.
Exactly, pay a lot more for chips. And then it goes back, and I think in part the concept of look at the economy, the old thing, look at the economy is stupid. Germany and France are not about to support actions in the Ukraine that totally upend their economies. And that's what that Russian gas supply interruption will do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I go back again, the little minor incursion slip up, what he's saying is the reality. We're not going to bless it all. Jeannie, you have something important to say, I can tell.
Okay. As we're closing this discussion on Putin and Biden and who has the biggest ego and what is behind Putin, what I think Putin really wants to do is what you have said. He wants to take back countries that once were under the Russian rule. Is the Ukraine just a mask? Is it just something he's showing, but he has no intention of going into the Ukraine, as you said, with the problems he has in his own country with economy and troops? Is he thinking of diverting our attention from the fact that where he really wants to go first is in the Baltic states? And why does he want to go in the Baltic states? They offer him a lot more to have them under his control. Also, he has a problem going into the Baltic states in one way because it's a part of NATO.
I was going to say, yeah.
And I think he wants to challenge NATO. I think Putin would love to weaken NATO, and you just mentioned it. Will France and Germany go to war to protect the Baltic states if he goes in there? No. And then he will weaken NATO. All these things you can think about, because I think the man has a big ego, and he's want to do something. That's my feeling.
Jacques, thank you very much, Jenny.
I don't agree. No. I don't agree with you. I don't agree with you. I think if Putin goes into the Baltic states, the way it's been in the rest of the world, in this part of the world recently, I think Germany and France have no choice. They will follow Article 5 of NATO, and they know very well what would be coming to them if they have any recollection of what happened in the First World War. Now, if they have forgotten it, that's another thing. I think for the moment they have not forgotten it. And there you will have France and Germany and Belgium and the rest, even and England coming, which is still part of NATO,
and we have the United States. Now you're talking like a real American today, I think, because the interest of the United States and the interest of Europe is not quite the same, you see. And when you talk about this country, this where we are now, what we feel very much, as has been said, a complete lack of resolve. You see, the United States is in retreat. It's not that they could not face the situation, but mentally it is in retreat. And resolve is the first arm. We're talking about all the arms in the nuclear and not nuclear. Resolve is the first arm that allows you to win. This is what has been helping Hitler at the beginning of the First World War. The European nations did not agree with each other. England was in France. When you compare it to the First World War, where fighting each other, bickering, etc., etc. So I do not agree with you on this. I know the president has been saying, I don't want to go to war for, I don't know which country you mentioned, because this is really lacking a view of the world and how what's going on here is going to affect what's going on there. You see, you cannot take things independently, and Ukraine either. I think this country will get some resolve when they understand that Ukraine is not Afghanistan. Ukraine is important for the United States.
But it's not an Article 5 country.
But it is not, no. Right. But let's make it more evident. The problem of resolve is still made more evident by the fact that there is a choice. But with Article 5, there is no choice. You have to go.
Which takes us back to this question of the Baltic countries being the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
If the Baltic countries are the goal, then you really do have a NATO issue.
And this is what a lot of people have in mind. You remember how the First World War was started? Just because a guy has been assassinated, and then the worst after that was on the way. So what you got to get is a real understanding of what the world is today, as it works. As somebody has said, I mean, the China is watching. How many people here in this country want to go to war with China because of Taiwan? I would say if I were China, I would go at the same time as Putin goes into Ukraine. I would go into Taiwan. I would do something. Then the United States would be what? And then suddenly they would have to get them up together and that you're sleeping.
No, I think the move to take back California is strong enough in this country that the risk of war going east is less, just thinking. You said earlier that we sometimes need to understand how this world works. And what occurred to me was the best way for that to happen is to come to the Vickers Landing current events meeting. Because we provide all the answers. The idea was to go through about 5 topics today. And appropriately, we've spent the whole time on the Ukraine. Let's talk a little bit about format and going forward. I think the idea of bringing in guest speakers still makes a lot of sense. And to the extent we can find, any of you can think of people that would be willing to come and speak to us, that would be wonderful. Carol, you've suggested somebody, and I think somebody else here has suggested a legislator on the Republican Party, or was that your friend? Yeah.
So he is our representative to the legislature.
But the topics of voting rights, voting law changes, I think Vicki Oakes ought to come back again, because when she spoke to us last year, the Florida laws had not yet been passed, and the federal law was still a likely possibility. Skip now forward a year, and the Florida laws have been passed. They now govern how the election will be carried out, and there is no possibility of a federal voting law at this stage that has left the barn. So maybe getting her back to talk about voting. Education, I think, is still a topic we can talk about a lot. I heard just the other day, Dukakis and the state legislature passed a bill, didn't they, limiting...
DeSantis.
DeSantis, did I say Dukakis?
Yeah, that's a rearview mirror.
Got your D's right. So I think, I don't know about the rest of it, I think education is a topic we can continue to learn more about, to get people from the local schools. Sal?
I would also suggest somebody speak about infrastructure in this country. Today, an entire bridge collapsed in Pittsburgh. It's pretty tragic, and we said in one of these meetings that it's going to have to be a few things like that before anybody pays attention to the huge need to keep up in this country with...
Bill's already been passed.
Oh, the bill has been passed. I still think I just think I'd like to see some...
Got it done yet.
Right, but I would like to see somebody really talk to us about it.
That's actually a great idea. If you think about it, Biden is actually arriving in Pittsburgh today to talk about how they're going to spend those infrastructure funds. But we might have, just in this community, somebody from JEA's leadership and the Port Authority. And their parents were sitting right over here. But seriously, when does Palmer take his position at the Port Authority? In March? Because they're going to be presumably charged with spending some of the infrastructure money down here, I would think. I don't know. But I'd certainly be interested in hearing his views and those of the Port Authority on what infrastructure we could benefit from. Because that law has been passed, $1.2 billion is looking for a home, $1.2 trillion looking for a home. And we ought to be as hospitable as we can be. Now that the bill is passed, let's get as much of that money for North Florida. That's one side, and of course JEA. And Bobby is going to be he's vice chair of JEA. And those are two very important things. But there may be others here that some of you, also other family members or friends, that we can come back on those topics. So education, tax policy, is that something we want to talk about? There's nothing going on in tax right now, I don't think.
I don't think so.
Education, voting rights, Ukraine. Inflation, good point.
That's the second most important of those issues.
Yeah. Well, we could get back an economics professor here that I think shows a great deal of even balanced views on the issue of economic change, a guy named Parvez Ahmed.
He has a weird sense of humor.
Parvez is a good personal friend of mine. I like him very much. Who would speak on the left on that. As he spoke to us twice before. I'd like to get him back with a conservative economics professor.
I'd like to just have the conservative one because I don't want him.
Leave him out. Yeah, I knew that was true. If Forrest were putting together the table, one of the chairs would be in the back room.
Well, he's not straight up.
That's because he's liberal.
Something's wrong with him.
We've been through
Really, I mean, the guy makes statements and he presents a list of issues that don't include the main issues. I have no regard for him.
Okay, we're going to put you partially in charge of finding us a conservative economist.
I don't mind hassling him about his list. His list was messed up. He knows it. He won't deal with it.
He's probably hiding in the list maker's defense room because Forrest is on the hunt.
Well, Huxley's talking to him somewhere.
I love it. What other issues might we talk about where you can think of local experts? I mean, I could easily get a red sweater and sit in that chair and pretend to be an expert on something.
I got a couple more I'll loan you. You gotta prove it to wear it long term. I think one thing that's interesting, particularly to me, about the Jacksonville Transportation Authority, is known, that used to be called the Jacksonville Expressway Authority. I think our community is really in a pretty favorable spot as far as our transportation. We're way ahead of Pittsburgh.
I was going to say, aren't we one of the fastest growing cities in the country today, north of Jacksonville?
Fastest growing county.
The fastest. But you think about being the fastest growing economy, it in part explains why it's so hard to find help. And although I think that's kind of a national problem, one I'd like to learn more about. I'd like to have somebody explain where these people get the money to eat, who used to be working and presumably needed to be working.
I think there's a lot of entrepreneurial activity that came out of COVID.
It's probably dead right. And in part also because we couldn't get together and you could do it from home on your Zoom box.
Right. And to have children is hard.
When we don't have a speaker, and we're not doing table talk, because table talk is one of the ways to get more people to participate and share their views at individual tables. I kind of like the idea of having two people sitting up here. I think that this is, and it doesn't have to be, I don't have to be one of the two people. We can get there. I think I saw a communist out on the street just the other day.
He's trying to be humorous.
Anyway, bring it
Nobody wants to see me very often.
and Forrest doesn't have to be our conservative, but I like him. But some issues don't divide neatly on left-right. And by the way, one of my biggest concerns with Congress today is that you think, the way the votes come out, that there must be an absolutely clear line between right and wrong. Because 100% of one party votes for one side and 100% of the other party votes the other way. I've never, in my life, never had major decisions that were that clear cut. I mean, there's some area of gray where, and it's in the gray area where you find compromise. And it doesn't seem to me like there is any desire to compromise in Washington.
That's a whole
I'm sorry?
That's a whole
several
sessions.
Yeah. We've used up an hour. Thank you all very much, and particularly thank you, Forrest.
Thank you.